Hello and welcome to another episode of the Classical Republican. Today we are talking about the Economic Intelligence Unit, a report for 2021. And this special issue is called the China Challenge. Okay, so when we're talking about democracy here, we're basically talking about classical liberalism. We're not talking about classical democracy. And I'm going to start by reading the intro here to give you a little more. First paragraph here, it says the Democracy Index, which began in 2006, provides a snapshot of the state of democracy worldwide in 165 independent states and 2 territories. This covers almost the entire population of the world and the vast majority of the world's states. Microstates are excluded. The Democracy Index is based on 5 categories: electoral process and pluralism, functioning of government, political participation, political culture, and civil liberties. Based on its scores on a range of indicators within these categories, each country is then classified as one of 4 types of regime: full democracy, flawed democracy, hybrid regime, or authoritarian regime. A full methodology and explanations can be found in the appendix. So yeah, we're not going to read the explanation, so I'll have this linked in the description. So this is the China edition, but yeah, the China, what's it called? The China Challenge. And so China looms large in this report. COVID-19 also looms large. Because they are talking about the changes that happened in many countries during COVID, during 2021. Here is a range. So you have full democracies, you have 21 of those, 53 flawed democracies, 34 hybrid, and 59 authoritarian. Okay, so let's go on. The global average score takes a big hit for a second consecutive year. Authoritarian pandemic responses are undermining democracy. And so these are authoritarian responses in all sorts of countries, not just in authoritarian regimes. That's what they're talking about. Governments have introduced a panoply of intrusive and coercive measures. And so you can take that throughout the United States. There were different responses in different states. Doesn't really take that into account. Penalizing the unvaccinated, maintenance of restrictions will generate resistance. Okay, and we're seeing that in Canada today. Let's go on. Let's see, highlights, top and bottom. Afghanistan displaces North Korea and Norway remains in first place. Latin America records the biggest downgrade of any region since the start of the index. The most improved countries are not always the best. Spain is downgraded to a flawed democracy. Okay, let's talk about that for a second here. So they're talking about the illegal crackdown on Catalonia and also the Catalonian politicians, and judicial independence has been disrupted. Now, I think this is really interesting with Philip Petit, with his involvement in Spain in the early part of this century. You saw an improvement in those things, and today, even though the same power is in charge, or the same party is in power, excuse me, they're not using classical republicanism. They're not using those principles that were introduced under Zapatero. They're kind of moving away from those things, and so we see that here with the judicial independence. The problem is that the parties are able to get control of it, and crack down on Catalonian politicians who are trying to declare independence. Let's go on. Asia's forward march of democracy halted. Yeah, so there's been a lot of trouble in certain countries like Myanmar. Let's say Sub-Saharan Africa, return of the coup. and we've seen a lot of well, a lot of coups, a lot of military dictatorships, and they're one thing that's troubling is a lot of those soldiers are trained, or the military officers are trained by U.S. Personnel and go through our military schools. So that's a little troubling. Let's go on. Some good news from Eastern Europe, except with Russia invading Ukraine now. But that's not, that was, this report came out before that, of course. Tunisia is demoted to hybrid regime status. Is Canada becoming more like America? Yeah, I think we're seeing that. And this came out at the end of last year, so that's really interesting. Okay, so here's the democracy index. You have Norway at number 1, New Zealand, Finland, Sweden, Iceland, Denmark, Ireland, Taiwan, Australia, Switzerland, Netherlands, Canada, Uruguay, Luxembourg, Germany, South Korea, Japan, United Kingdom, Mauritius, Austria, and Costa Rica. And then down here in flawed democracy is the United States of America, where I live. Yeah, so let's go on. You can go look at the list and see where your country is. Let's go to the China challenge. Okay, so economic powerhouse, China's state-led capitalist model. Okay, so yeah, so China, there's a great question, and it's argued among leftists all the time. Is China a communist country or capitalist country? And so it's so this is a good description right here. It's a state-led capitalist country. Yeah, I've heard some interesting justifications that they didn't have the material culture that you needed to get to communism, and so they kind of took a step back. There's different justifications, different Marxist justifications for what they're doing right now, or what they're doing really since the late 80s under Deng Xiaoping. Or wait, no, I guess it was the early 80s. Yeah, he took over in late 70s, and yeah, and they really changed from the days of Mao. But it is still very state-led. So let's carry on. Will China become the world's largest economy in the early 2030s? That's what they're projecting. But the economy is slowing down, and they have been, and people have been projecting this for decades now, that they would overtake the US. So we've yet to see that. China's political system, authoritarian meritocracy. And let me read here. Let's see. There are no free trade unions, no independent judiciary, no real equality before the law. The state does not practice religious tolerance and routinely uses torture. Property rights are not guaranteed. In 2021, a state crackdown on entrepreneurs under the Common Prosperity campaign led to a downgrade in its score. The only civil liberties that Chinese citizens enjoy are those of basic security and freedom to study, work, and travel, though these can be circumscribed by the state. So let's go on. The state that stands above the people. But one could argue that that's kind of the model of China throughout their whole history. Is the individual was second to the community, and that culminated all the way up to the emperor, who was the son of heaven, who had to communicate and receive the mandate of heaven to ensure prosperity throughout the central kingdom, as it is still known today. Zhongguo, it means center country. Yeah, so let's see, on page 19, where's this? Transparency. Yeah, it talks about authoritarian meritocracy, and that's what it's always been with, under the empire. They had, under the Confucian empires, probably from the beginning of the Han Dynasty in the 2nd century BC, you had uh, the exam system, and so officials had to take exams in order to, uh, you know, become an official, and then to get promoted, you had to take further exams, and yeah, so I mean, they're kind of just doing what they've always done, but there is corruption. Go on. Future of the China model. Winning friends and influence. So that's talking about the Belt and Road system, where they're trying to kind of build a lot of infrastructure around um, uh, South Asia and Africa, and trying to open ports and trade routes so that there can be more opportunities for commerce with China. And so there's issues with that, where they are coming in, building a lot of stuff, and if the country isn't able to pay them back, then they take control of what they built, and they're in charge of port facilities in various places around the world now, and have a big footprint where previously they did not. Will the China challenge lead to democratic renewal in the West? Probably not. Is it true that we are living through a democratic recession? Yeah, most likely. Diagnosing democracy's shortcomings. So here's a good graph. Shows the evolution of democracy by category. And these are their categories: electoral process and pluralism, political culture, functioning of government, civil liberties, and political participation. So the only thing that's going up is political participation. Okay, but the increase in political participation, with all else declining, it's good, but it can lead to runaway majoritarianism, especially when it's combined with institutional decline. So that's my analysis on that. Civil liberties are being eroded. Basic democratic rights are being rolled back. Trust in government and parties has plummeted. And an upsurge in popular participation and protest. Yeah, so like I was saying before, it's good to have popular participation and be able to express yourself, but if you're just an angry mob, that's, if you don't have institutions to channel that energy, that's not necessarily a good thing. And people's attachment to democracy is weakening, so that's not good, even if you have more participation. If people take it for granted, if people are skeptical about the outcome, that can be troublesome. Let's see. It says, on the downside, popular frustration with functioning of democracy has also led increasing numbers of people to embrace non-democratic alternatives, whether in the form of technocratic governance or ruled by strong men. Many people no longer believe that governments will act in the interests of those who elected them, and many have become cynical about representative democracy. There has been a trend toward more technocratic, non-accountable forms of governance in the advanced democracies in the past 2 decades. So let me read on. Governments have sought to insulate themselves from public pressure by outsourcing decision-making to non-elected bodies. Okay, so these non-elected bodies can also, usually it means people who are appointed by a president or prime minister or government. And then, you know, these people don't have accountability, but this non-elected bodies can also mean sortition. We have seen a rise in classical democracy in that manner, with the increased use of sortition. That means random selection for people, for people to sit on committees, and that will work to solve a problem or come up with policy recommendations. You know, in classical democracy, it's not about elections or voting, but about holding office and random selection. So if we have more randomly selected bodies, that may be one alternative that could be helpful. Let's go on. Democracy is not delivering for many people. Economic drivers of discontent. So those are interesting. Growing appeal of non-democratic ideas. Crisis of confidence and of ideas. Technocracy or democracy. Okay, so technocracy, that means that people who are seen as experts and they just get chosen somehow to be able to go and run things, and that way the citizens don't really have to participate except every 2 to 4 years in elections, and they don't really have to do or think or debate anything. So that makes it easier for apathetic populations. Let's go. And so this is definitely a contradistinction to Francis Fukuyama, who wrote the Last Man and End of History back after the fall of the Berlin Wall. And his thesis was that, okay, communism has fallen. You know, there were two great superpowers. You had and they were both supporting a different ideology. You had the US and supporting liberal democracy, and you had the Soviet Union supporting communism. And since the Soviet Union fell, communism was therefore discredited, and the only thing left, the only viable, usable ideology was classical liberalism, or at that time maybe even neoliberalism. And so he said it's the end of history. Like, sure, things will progress, but as far as ideological debates, there's no question it's ended. The debate has ended as to what ideology is the best, and it's liberal democracy. That's what he said. So yeah, so there we have this revitalization, maybe of some older ideas. Maybe classical republicanism can be one of those. But we see in China, some people say, oh, they're communists, so they're trying to revive the old Soviet model, but they're not. It's very different from the old Soviet model. It is more of a technocracy of finding experts who can just do what needs to be done. Let's go on through here. We've got some more indexes. This is, by region. So this is good. All right, and then we go, let's keep scrolling on down by regions. And then here are the appendixes. Here's the appendix, defining and measuring democracy. So if you want to read that, that can be very useful on their methodology and how they graded all these countries. And then here are the questions you have to ask and how they're scored. Yeah. So this is a really good measure of classical liberalism. But but this is not a good measure of classical republicanism. I have toyed with the idea of making a classical Republican grading system based on Philip Pettit's writings, but I'm not sure how simple or complex it should be. So if you have any ideas for me, you could leave it in the comments, and make sure everybody subscribes and is able to share the message of classical republicanism. Um, until next time, long live the Republic.